A boomer boomer bing bang. Yes, it's the Eurovision Song Contest, and you're thinking, why are we talking about the Eurovision Song Contest? Well, it's actually a strong betting market. There's lots of money that's been placed on it. It caught my attention first in 2006 when I saw millions being traded through it. And in fact, it's a staple of my trading calendar. Every May, I look forward to this particular competition and the opportunities that it can present. And that's what we're going to talk about in this video. If you're interested in learning to use BetAngel, head on over to our website where you can download a free trial. If you're interested in learning how to use it, then head over to the BetAngel Academy where you can do exactly that. And if you want to talk to like-minded people, then head on over to our forum. So the Eurovision Song Contest may seem like an unusual betting and Betfair trading market, but it's been very popular every May. And there are millions that get traded through it. It first caught my attention when Lordi won it, or I should say Finland won it in 2006. And Lordi back then were a very unusual entrant into the competition. Not the sort of thing you would expect to see on Eurovision, but the rules that they had in place then presented that opportunity to Lordi, and they went on to win it at rather large odds. But when you look at the market, and the thing that caught my attention back in 2006, apart from the winning song, was the amount of money that was going through the market. And in fact, I do trade special markets fairly frequently throughout the year. I tend to pick and choose them because my main criteria for trading a market tends to be volume and liquidity. And that's exactly what the Eurovision Song Contest brings. So let's have a look at how it plays out and the sort of strategies and things that you can do, but also who this year's winner is likely to be. So when we're looking at the Eurovision Song Contest from a betting or trading perspective, it's important to understand there are sort of three phases to the competition. In the run-up to the actual night of the competition, the market is dominated by news flow. So you've often seen me talking in other videos about opinion and emotion, but typically the sort of thing that we're seeing on Eurovision that forms an opinion within the market and where the money is likely to go, and therefore what odds are going to be available, tends to be news flow. So if you get a common theme that is running through the competition that particular year, a group or a country I should say, that tends to be highlighted, news flow will drive that price and will drive the odds. We will return to this in a bit towards the end of this video. But when we actually get to the competition itself, particularly the night of the competition, there are semi-finals and you can bet on those and do other things, but they tend to be lower liquidity. Then the evening is split up into two key areas. The first area is when you actually get all of the countries playing their songs, and what you will tend to find is that the market reacts to a performance. So if it's been a good performance, the price will get pulled in, and if it's been a bad performance or has not gone down particularly well, then the price tends to drift out a little bit. So on the evening of the competition, I can sit down, watch it and enjoy it, but also I can actually trade those little movements that you see in the market around that particular period of time. When we actually get to the competition itself and the actual all of the music has stopped and the voting starts, then the market takes on a completely different characteristic. So you can think of this as your in-play period of the market. Basically, all of that opinion and emotion collapses down to how many points each of these countries are going to get. And that is dominated by the voting structure. So it's worth examining and looking at the history of the voting structure to understand how that is likely to influence the outcome of any particular year within Eurovision. So before 1997, all of the voting within Eurovision was done by juries in each individual country. And then they would go to that country and say, who do you award your 12 points and whatever for? And as a consequence, you tended to find that the voting patterns were slightly unusual. You would tend to get votes for some countries that you wouldn't expect and some for others, because it all came down to cultural differences into each individual country. But of course, one of the themes that has run through the Eurovision Song Contest for a number of years is the political voting. You tend to get neighbouring countries voting for each other. The Netherlands vote for Belgium, Belgium vote for the Netherlands. Eastern Bloc countries tend to vote for each other or their neighbours, and so on. So that's dominated the voting for a number of years. Back in 2004, what actually happened was they decided that they would actually give televoting some dominance within the actual competition itself, and eventually they switched over to make it completely mandatory, and that ended up with the situation where we had Lordi going on to win the Eurovision Song Contest. It was almost a protest vote against the Eurovision stuffiness and all of the sort of songs that were coming out of that. Everybody sort of did it for a bit of a laugh, and it's always worth noting when you look at special betting markets such as reality TV shows and so on to understand the voting system, because that will influence the individual patterns. So where you get a large televoting presence, you could get all sorts of weird and quirky things going on within there. So after Lordi and a few other incidences, they decided to actually split the voting eventually into half being a televoting and half being a country jury. And that's the sort of situation that we have now. That system came in 2009, so the televotes will account for half of the voting patterns, and then the jury will account for the others. And where the televoting is concerned, that will go with popular opinion. Whatever is the themed narrative of that particular competition, you can be absolutely sure that people will phone up in their huge numbers in order to push through what the populist country is at that particular moment in time. That can probably explain why the UK, since it left Europe, has performed so badly, but also the introduction of more Eastern Bloc countries into the competition has also skewed the results away from typically the countries that were dominant for a large number of years. But also you've got to account now for that jury voting. That will be sort of slightly biased to a certain extent, but necessarily you will see two different types of patterns there, and there has been a reasonable amount of research done on those particular patterns and how they're likely to play out. So that's sort of how the voting works, how that influences the way that things go. But fundamentally speaking, when you actually look at the results as they're coming in, much as the same way that you would do if a team was 1-0 or 2-0 up, or a horse was 10 furlongs in the lead, that necessarily will determine the price from that particular point onwards. So you tend to get some very large swings early on, and then it begins to settle into a pattern where it becomes more obvious who the winner is going to be. So who is the winner going to be this year? So when we look at who's going to get the populist vote this year, I think we know who it's going to be. And when we look at the narrative that's been running in the press in the run-up to this year's Eurovision Song Contest, there is also a strong narrative and theme developing over the course of this particular competition. Because as I'm recording this video, we are in 2022. We have the war between Russia and the Ukraine. Russia will not be in the competition, but Ukraine will be. And if you look on our forum, you can see people have been chattering about what odds do they think that Ukraine will go to, because they started at very, very large odds and they've gradually been getting shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. So you could have got on Ukraine at pretty much any point throughout the competition and made fairly serious amounts of money. It's pretty certain that the populist vote will go for Ukraine this year, almost certainly. It's difficult to see beyond that. You've got the United Kingdom and Italy who are closely following behind. So the only question mark is, how will the jury vote? Will they go for the same narrative as well? But if you think about the amount of pressure on these people, it's going to almost certainly be skewed in favour of Ukraine as well, because it would be very unlikely that the jury would be particularly popular in their country if they didn't do that. However, they are there to judge technically what the songs will be, but you will work out fairly quickly after the first few sets of votes whether it's going to go that way or not. So yeah, this particular year I think is very easy to read. The battle below that will probably be a little bit more interesting, so some of the secondary markets may come into play. But it's almost certain that that narrative will be followed through this year, and Ukraine will go off at a much, much shorter price than it is at the point at which I'm recording this video, and it's very likely that they will go on to win the competition. Though the competition winners have to host it the following year, so not sure how that plays out. But yeah, that's the overall narrative that we're seeing this year. So it'll be interesting to see how the competition plays out this year. I think I probably know already. I also think there will be added interest to it this year, because of the amount of hype that will be generated as we run up to this competition, and therefore I'm expecting the overall betting volumes to be pretty strong on this particular market. If you want to actively trade it, be aware of that underlying narrative that's taking place this year, but also be aware that there are three phases to it. The pre-off phase, which we've talked about, the news flow element of it, when the actual artists are performing, and then when we actually get to the voting stage. There are three different phases in which you can participate. You could participate in any one of those, or just one of them. There are strategies that will work particularly well in either of those. But two of them will be based upon actually watching the competition itself. But nonetheless, they are active trading markets. And I suggest if you want to keep up to date with this particular year's Eurovision Song Contest, then visit the forum, where I'm sure there will be lots of chatter on the forum about exactly how the competition is panning out. But you can also have a look at some of the threads from previous years where that sort of discussion has taken place as well. So anyhow, it's an unusual market, but it's a very volume rich and liquid market, and it's one that I'll be trading this weekend.